So welcome to this meeting of the Transportation Policy and Planning Board for March 1st, 2021. I will call the meeting to order. Ann, if you would please call the roll.
Grant Foster.
Here.
Keith Berman.
Good.
Rebecca Kemble. Eric Sundquist is a notified absence. Randy Udell.
Yes, I'm here.
Chris McCahill.
Here.
Tom Wilson.
Here.
Baltazar de Anda Santana.
Here.
Margaret Bergamini.
Here.
Badri Lankella.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. So with Eric gone for the entire meeting and our one vacancy, both Badri and Margaret will be in voting status for the entirety of the meeting. Tanya, if you could please, Alder Foster, go ahead.
Yeah, I just heard from Alder Kemble that she's attending by phone and I think is maybe stuck in the attendees section instead of panelists.
Would her number be 347-8097? Anybody knows that? Or
I'm guessing tech facilitator might be able to help us get it sorted out. I think that's right. Yes. Yep.
Okay, let's see if I can, I don't think I can promote her to panelist from here, but okay. Where was I then? All right, okay, so yeah, Tanya, would you please proceed with the standard virtual meetings opening statement?
Yes, I can. Welcome to our virtual meeting. We are going to cover a few basic items before beginning. If you lose connection at any point during the meeting, you can reconnect by clicking the link or calling the number in your original email. To members and city staff, members, if you are able, please activate your video and keep it on for the duration of the meeting. Staff, if you are able, please activate your video when you are speaking. Members are responsible for muting and unmuting themselves in this meeting. To begin, to minimize background noise and distraction, please remain muted unless recognized to speak. Use the raise hand feature when you'd like to be recognized to speak, ask questions, or request a roll call vote. The chair will do their best to call on committee members in the order in which hands are raised. Lowering your hand will take you out of the queue. Members of the public who have registered to speak, the name you entered in Zoom must match the name you entered in registration. You will remain muted until called upon. The clerk will tell you when your time is up. After speaking, a member of the body may ask you a question. If you need to share documentation with the board, please send it to the email listed on today's agenda. Chair, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tanya. Do we have any registrants for public comment for items not on the agenda? I believe the answer is no. Are there any communications, disclosures, and recusals from members of the body? Please use the hand raise feature. And I guess I'll just ask Alder Kemble, do you have any disclosures or recusals? You should be on, Alder Kemble. Hopefully we can get that to work for speaking later. We'll move on to our first.
Can you hear me? I'm
yes.
Here. Right. Okay.
Well, hi, Alder Kemble. Do you have any disclosures or recusals for tonight's meeting?
No, I don't.
Okay, thank you. I'll try to do my best with the phone thing here, not being able to see a hand raise. So I'll just ask you when we have anything.
Chair, excuse me.
I can raise my hand by star 9ing.
Yes, I was just going to tell her that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Excellent. All right. Seeing no disclosures or recusals, we'll move on to our first item for the evening. Legistar 64254, approving the issuance of a request for proposals for the redevelopment of 415 North Lake Street, the State Street Campus Garage, known as The Property, and establishing a process for the review of responses to the RFP and selection of a development team for the property. I believe we have Tom Otto and Jeff Greger here to present.
Yep. My name is Jeff Greger. I'm a planner in the planning division. I'm here with Tom Otto from Economic Development. We have just a really brief couple of slides to go through to orient the board to the State Street Campus mixed-use project, and then we'll be more than happy to answer any questions you might have. To orient everybody, the location we're looking at is the State Street parking ramp at Lake Street. We are not going to be doing anything to the Francis Street portion of the ramp, and that ramp will remain open during the duration of the project if it so goes forward in the future. The key project components for this project is to replace the State Street campus garage with a new parking facility. In general, right now, the project is looking to replace the same number of parking stalls that are in the current ramp. We would also, the project's also looking at constructing a permanent city-owned off-street intercity bus terminal. And then there would also be a mixed-use development component consisting of retail and housing above the parking structure. Just a real general timeline. Again, this schedule is an estimate and is subject to change, but should we get council approval and board commission approval to move ahead with the release of the RFP, that would happen the week of April 5th. The RFPs would be due June 30th. And then there would be a selection process to select a developer to move forward with. That would go to council for approval. We're hoping that could happen by December of 21. Then we would, the city would enter into negotiations with the developer and assess the project feasibility. We anticipate that would take till September of 2022. The development agreement would get approved by early 2023. Then we would move into design, construction documents, city entitlements, and would anticipate demolition of the existing garage sometime in early 2025 and construction on the new garage, and intercity bus terminal would commence roughly second quarter of 2025. And, you know, that seems like a long ways out, but if we've learned anything from projects similar to this one, these do take a lot of time. So we just want to try to build that into the process. So that was a quick overview. Tom and I are happy to answer any questions you might have about the RFP itself, what the content or the timing of any of these items. So I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. Questions for staff? Seeing none, is there a motion on the item? So I'd be looking for a motion to approve the issuance of the RFP. Alder Furman.
Move to approve the issuance of the RFP.
Is there a second? Chris, is that?
Yep, second.
Excellent. Discussion. Alder Furman, would you like to speak to your motion?
Nope, I think it's pretty straightforward. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay. All those in favor of approving the issuance of the request for proposals for the redevelopment of 415 North Lake Street, the State Street campus garage, the property, and establishing a process for the review of responses to the RFP and selection of a development team for the property, please unmute yourselves and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, no. Chair believes it's unanimous. If you'd like to register a no vote, please raise your hand. Seeing no votes, that is unanimous. Thank you. Next item is Legistar 64387, Metro Network Redesign Workshop. I believe we have a number of folks here from Jarrett Walker and then Urban Assets Consulting.
I'm Mike Checkfall with the City Transportation Department. And so we've started working on the Metro Transit Network redesign. We have some staff from our consulting firm, Jarrett Walker and associates who've done work all over the country and internationally as well. If you recall, they were here to kick off the project a few months ago, I think late in 2020. So he has, so we have Jared with us today, as well as Daniel and Chris, and then Melissa from Urban Assets. So Jared, if you're on, I'll hand it off to you, and you should be able to share your screen.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Great to be back here. Great to have a chance to talk with you all again. I'm going to do this presentation I'm about to give is about 20-30% review of really important things that I've said before, but the rest is new and interesting material out of our choices report, which I hope you'll give more attention to. I'm going to start the presentation. Okay, and just double checking that you can, just double checking now that you can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Okay, excellent. So where we are now in the process is that we have, we are at the choices report, which is the first report out of this study. Now, as you recall, this process is going to be a conversation back and forth between technical work and community discussion. So this choices report sets up the first phase of community discussion, where we start having a conversation about what priorities will be. But the next round, where we have actual contrasting alternatives to show the public, is what will really draw a lot of that out and engage even more people. But first of all, I want to just show you a few interesting things the things that have come up in the course of our analysis of your work that we think are interesting for one reason or another. And one of those is certainly what we've learned from COVID. Here's your fall 2019 ridership by stop. And here's the same thing for fall 2020. So before, after, before, after, before, after. What's interesting is the difference. So here we have colored in red stops that lost more of their ridership, and we've colored in green stops that lost less of their ridership. And a few things jump out at you right away. The 5 transfer points still have a lot lost relatively little of their ridership, which is to say a lot of the ridership that is still happening was routed through those transfer points. More generally, you can see areas along Northport, for example, a lot of areas out in the Southwest, where relatively speaking, a lot of ridership was retained. Now, if you compare that to poverty, some pretty obvious things jump out, don't they? Where you have higher poverty, lower income areas, you tend to have more people who kept riding all through COVID. Now, that's something we've seen everywhere. And it says something important about who is really the foundation of your transit market. They are not the whole transit market, but they are the foundation you build on, because they are always going to be there. These are the people who kept civilization going, who made sure that there were green beans on the shelf when we went to the store or set out for food or whatever else. Fundamental to keeping society going. So now I want to quickly review this sort of the most fundamental idea that we propose to use to analyze really everything we do in the course of this process. And that's this idea of access. Here's a person. She's in a city full of possible destinations, things she could go to, things she could do, places she could shop, places she could work, places she could study. And in 45 minutes, or in a reasonable amount of time that she's likely to have in her day, there's some area that she could get to. The amount of this stuff that's in that area is her access. We can calculate her access to jobs as the number of jobs in that area she can get to, but you can also look at access to education, shopping, all kinds of other things. So here's the cool thing. When we measure access, we're measuring a whole bunch of different things that people care about, but that they don't, lots of people are focusing on different aspects of this, but not necessarily noticing that one measure speaks to a lot of them. So when we measure people's ability to go places so that they can do things, we're really measuring the city's success at the most fundamental function of a city. The function of a city is to put people close to a lot of opportunities so that they can have all sorts of different interactions that produce all sorts of value. So many economists would say that travel time, and particularly travel time to work or school, is really the foundation of the functionality of a city. And that's exactly what we're measuring. In terms of the civil rights or racial justice imperative, my most important question for people working on these issues is, what exactly is the thing that we need to share equitably? And I'm going to argue that access is really that thing. Access is really the thing that it's most important to fight for. And finally, access is simply freedom. Well, if you think about your freedom to do anything that requires leaving home, that's going to be limited fundamentally by by whether you can get to these things in a reasonable amount of time. That's why I refer to access as the wall around your life, the sort of outer limit on what you can do. But the other cool thing about access is that it pretty well captures how network design affects ridership. Now, as we all know, ridership goes up and down for a lot of other reasons. But the way that network design influences ridership is largely by improving access. And of course, as you get ridership, you not only get all of your sustainability and congestion benefits of transit, all of which arise from transit being ridden rather than just existing, but and then of course you also get revenue. So we're going to be looking a lot at your system in terms of how access works. And so one of the striking things, of course, is that if we look at access from particularly favored parts of the city, and I don't mean favored in a sense of discrimination, I mean favored in the sense of naturally, geographically central and close to things. If somebody is living in downtown Madison, they can get to about 112,000 jobs in 45 minutes on your transit network as it is. If someone is out on Northport Boulevard, they can get to barely a tenth as many in that amount of time. And we'll be looking a lot in the study at why that is and how you can improve that. Certainly the delays involved in getting through the North Transfer Point are part of the story for the North Side. But it's also true that by virtue of just being further from destinations, it's going to be more expensive to give them the same amount of access that you have if you're in the inner city. Here's what it looks like then if we calculate the access from every point in the city and put it all on one map. So now this map is darker where you have access to more jobs within 45 minutes. And what we see very clearly is that access is, of course, concentrated along your more frequent network where you're delivering the most service, and that service is producing a direct access value. Again, we see the impact of the transfer points, where at the transfer points, access drops off rather abruptly. That has to do, again, with the delay involved in going through those transfer points. I'm not ready to tell you that the transfer points are a bad idea. They have their value. They achieve some important things, but they definitely have a disadvantage that is visible here. It's important also to think about where transit's adding to access beyond where people could just walk. So transit, the access that we're counting in this closest in area, a lot of that is just things that are in walking distance. So it's helpful to think about what transit is adding in the upper image relative to what's just there close by anyway in the lower image. And the striking thing here, of course, you can see quickly that transit's actually adding a lot across inner parts of Madison, a lot of areas here where a whole lot of access is provided beyond your walking distance. When we look at access in the relationship of job density, though, where jobs are, we encounter this problem right away of the employment areas that have poor access related to where they are, mostly because they're built out along freeways in places where there's a number of other difficulties there that I'll touch on. Two of these employment areas are going to get a significant access improvement out of BRT phase 1, but the rest are going to be problems for us. They're going to be challenges for us as we work through the study. When you look at access in relation to residential density, where everybody lives, this is a much better fit overall. But still, you've got those isolated patches of highway-oriented or freeway-oriented density that are very expensive to serve. Please do not build any more of this because it is an ongoing problem for you in terms of being able to get efficient transit service to it. I'll talk more about that. Same thing, access in relation to low income. Most low-income people in Madison are close to good service. But again, you have these outlying areas in awkward configurations that are going to be a challenge for us. Now, how does transit expand access? If we want people to be able to get to more places sooner, what exactly do we do? The answer is we run service that is frequent, that's reasonably fast and reliable, and that's running at all times of day when it's needed. But because you can't afford to run that quality of service everywhere, you have to focus it where there are many people and activities that could benefit. And that's really the critical part. And that's why this is going to be hard. Because, so why does frequency matter so much? Frequency is the most neglected element. And if you are yourself someone who gets around by car or by bicycle and doesn't use transit very much, there isn't an equivalent to frequency in your own daily experience. There isn't an equivalent of just not being able to start your trip at all until something happens. So frequency is a cubed benefit. It means you go when you want to go in a way that motorists and cyclists take for granted, but that is a challenge in transit. Secondly, it means you make connections easily to get to more places. Frequency is the thing that combines a bunch of routes into a network. And it means you're less risk of being stranded by disruption. A bus breaks down, the next will be along soon. You have a remarkably infrequent network by the standards of university towns and state capitals of about your size. When we map your network by all-day frequency, the only consistently all-day frequent routes are a few right around the campus, these corridors going west and a bit going northeast along Gorham, Washington. But most of your network is every 30 or 60 minutes, and these are frequencies at which you have to plan your life around the bus schedule. So we're going to be bringing you back to frequency a lot, because what matters is not just where the buses go, but whether they're coming often enough to be coming when somebody needs them. When we zero in on the isthmus, one of the things we notice is there are a lot of 30-minute routes on top of each other. They don't always have their schedules written in such a way that they add up to a high-frequency service on that common segment. That's something we'll definitely be looking at more closely, because you can expand access quite a bit just by doing that. Although this also is related to the timing of the transfer points. So it's an interesting interconnected problem we'll be working on. But the hard part, of course, is that to get the best average access and aim for the highest possible ridership, you have to focus the best service where the highest possible number of people can use it. If you're focused on ridership, we'll come back to whether you're focused on ridership or how much. Density, how many people or jobs or activities are near each potential transit stop is, of course, the first estimate, the first order estimate of not only the potential market for transit, but the access value that it's provided there. The access we're providing from that stop, the value of it to the community is, of course, related to how many people or jobs are there to take advantage of it. Walkability, it has to be possible to walk between the stop and the activities around it. That's one of the reasons why the inner city is generally more favorable to transit than some of the stuff you built out on the freeway. It must be safe to cross the street at a stop, which it also presents a challenge when we're out on some of the DOT roads that haven't been built with frequent street crossings. We can see that one of your challenges here is that although you have several areas of high density, some of them are walkable, like the inner city, and some of them, like out in the Southwest, are highly unwalkable. The disconnected street patterns and so on that you see here, the amount of density built back into cul-de-sac structures creates an ongoing challenge for public transit, particularly if it is then difficult to cross these streets where public transit could actually operate, as you must in order to be able to get to service going in both directions. Linearity is the other important thing. My architecture and development friends all understand walkability, but linearity is something I have to explain to them because it's a unique need of public transit. Transit needs to be able to run in reasonably straight lines. So if I've got 4 land uses and I've got them in a straight line so that one transit line can serve all of them in a way that feels like a reasonably direct path between any 2 of them, that's a winning geography for transit. Transit can succeed there. But if they're set back, or if I have to deviate to get to them, I end up with a longer line, less circuitous, more travel time for the passenger, a higher cost to operate because it costs more to run further, and therefore probably a lower frequency, which further which makes the service even less useful. In all respects, even with density and walkability the same, this nonlinear structure is going to be harder for us to serve. You've got great examples here in Madison. The Isthmus, a great example of a completely linear development pattern where it's very easy to run straight and serve everything. The UW Health East campus is the sort of thing that, again, I hope you don't build again, because it's the nature of those street patterns makes it impossible to run buses in reasonably straight lines. And that's going to be an ongoing barrier to the ability to get mobility out there. Obviously, there are needs out there, there's stuff being built out there, but it's always going to be a difficult place to get good transit to because of the way these looping roads make it difficult to provide a logical straight transit route. So here's the big challenge. Most of the dense places outside central Madison, dense, lots of people, lots of jobs, people needing to get to them, are not walkable or linear. And mostly that's what's out by the Beltline, out on the edges on all sides. That makes them very expensive to serve in a way that provides decent levels of access. So one of our challenges is going to be, given how expensive it is to get to those places, how much do we do? How much do we do that? What do we do in the face of that difficulty? So your challenge then is that high ridership service, if that were your goal, would run high frequency, offering good access in places that are dense, walkable, and linear. That would, such a network would cover most, but not all, of the population, jobs, people in poverty, and people of color, but not all of them. And if you wanted to get to more of them, you wanted to get to those harder to reach places, you'd have to run some service that is predictably not high ridership service. It would be what we call coverage service. So I've introduced you before this idea of the trade-off between ridership goals and coverage goals. Ridership goals are not just about ridership, because when we plan for ridership, we're doing a bunch of cool things. We're getting the lowest subsidy per passenger. We're supporting dense and walkable development. All of our environmental benefits, emissions reductions, and so on come from ridership, and our congestion benefits, reduction in vehicle miles traveled. We achieve a ridership goal by maximizing average access to opportunity, maximizing where people can get to, the wall around their life on average, but not for everyone. On the other hand, a coverage goal is what you do if you're trying to get some service to everyone, some service near every home and job. It's what you do if you're thinking in terms of lifeline or baseline level of access to everyone. And it arises from political geography. If you're a councilor, if your alders are in wards, there's going to be, that's inevitably a consideration too. These are both really important goals of transit, but they are opposite. They produce opposite kinds of network. Quick mention on equity. We're all talking about equity and social justice now, and I want to caution or invite equity advocates to think about this. Equity as a principle doesn't tell you which of these two things you want or what balance of them you want. The ridership goal gives you a network that is good access for most people, including most minority people, but no service for some. The coverage goal gives you minimal poor access for everyone. Which of those things is equitable? I stand back. It's up for your community to figure that out. But the trade-off is unavoidable. However, you can choose a deliberate balance point on the spectrum between these goals, and that's what we're going to be working with you to do, so that by the time we get to the draft plan, we know we're implementing your direction based on what the community has told us. So the next step will be to draw contrasting network concepts, like this example from Eugene, a higher ridership concept where you'll see more frequency, but not service to everywhere. A higher coverage concept where you see service to everywhere, but corresponding less frequency, and we'll see what the community thinks. As a coda, I want to mention one more thing, which is that when we start talking about how to divide up a limited resource, like the bus service budget, the question inevitably comes up, is this the right amount? Should we have more bus service? And I want to just show you a couple of things. The real answer to that question is based on who you are and how much and what you want to be as a community. So we always have to be cautious in looking at peers. It's a little bit like being back in high school and judging yourself entirely by what the other kids are like. That's not the only thing you should care about. You should care about what you want to be as a city. But just as some perspective, on the left here is transit investment, the quantity of service per capita that you're operating, quantity of service divided by population. And to the right is relevance, which is pre-COVID ridership per capita. How many people are using the service relative to the population? And what you see is that Madison, certainly doing better than places like Des Moines or Lincoln, but Madison's a much denser place with a bigger university. But when you put Madison alongside some peers like Milwaukee or Ann Arbor or Eugene, you see, moderate, typical level of investment, pretty good level of ridership, only Eugene out ahead of you. Eugene, by the way, already has a BRT system, and that may make up some of the difference. But as I say to transit advocates in the United States, don't just envy Europe, start by envying Canada. When you look at Madison in the context of some very comparable Canadian cities like Saskatoon or Kitchener-Waterloo, or the closest to you, Winnipeg, which is about 3 times your size. But again, we're talking per capita here. We're talking about these things divided by population. Winnipeg and Saskatoon are both capital cities, of course, that also have significant universities in them. And as you can see, there's a lot of room to aspire to even just be more like a comparable Canadian city in terms of the intensity of public transit and having that come right back to you in terms of benefit. I'd love to be able to show you average access for each of these cities. That's a more complicated calculation. But since access predicts ridership pretty well, I'm guessing that the overall access to opportunity that people experience in these cities is pretty comparable to that difference in ridership. So again, your decision if you want to be happy about how you look next to US peers, or if you want to aspire to something a little more like what's being achieved north of the border. So this back to the timeline. I will pass it back to Daniel briefly here to just review where we are and talk a little bit about next steps.
Okay, thanks, Jarrett. So yeah, just to review where we are at in the process again. We've spent the fall and January getting familiar with your city and your network, and all that we've learned is being summarized in the Choices Report, which you got the executive summary of in your packet for today. The full report will be released probably within about a week. And we are starting at this moment the first phase of public engagement. And so as of this week, that means on Wednesday, we'll have first in the morning an invitational stakeholder meeting, and then in the evening a public meeting where we'll be presenting the types of information that you heard in this presentation, and giving people an opportunity to ask questions and weigh in. So this phase of engagement is going to go for probably about 5 or 6 weeks, after which we are going to summarize all that we've heard and come back to you for direction about how we should illustrate the alternatives more concretely. And so with staff, through the spring, we will design these alternatives, and we'll come out with an alternatives report in the summer. And then toward the end of the summer, we will then be asking people, okay, so here are, you've told us what our priorities should be. Here's what it would look like if the network really went this way. Here's what it would look like if it went some other way. What do you think? And that'll form the basis. What we hear from that will form the basis for how we build the draft plan over the fall, getting to a draft plan report in early 2022, and then the conversation about whether we got it right and how to get to a final plan. All of which with the goal to implement, depending on when we get to a final plan, either in fall of 22 or fall of 23. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Before we get to questions, we do have one registrant for public comment. Bob Schaefer, 6 Cottonwood Circle, neither in support nor opposition, wishing to speak. Bob, if you're there, you have 3 minutes. You may go ahead when you're ready.
Okay, I was hoping perhaps to comment after there was some discussion. I think the presentation pointed out many things, and I think that there are some other solutions that are possible. And that I think that one of the things that I did send you and the rest of the board members some information that I put together regarding the 2019 ridership and bus stop boardings and everything like that. And that what is, I think, a general trend that we need to look at in terms of the public transportation in Madison is that over the last 10 years, that 2019 was, which is the last year that we actually got valid data from based on COVID, that that was the second worst public transportation ridership over the last 10 years. And when we look at it based on a longer term of history and use a percentage of population calculation, that rather than having the 12 million ridership in transport in 2019, we ought to have had about 21 million based on the percentage of population that was available to use transportation. So I think public transportation, as we experience it, is a declining option, and that I think many of the options that we exist and are looked at in other communities are not taken into consideration that Madison is an isthmus, and that none of the other communities that were presented are existing in an isthmus type of configuration. And so I think that with the lakes and everything like that involved in Madison, that I think that we find ourselves in somewhat of a unique situation. And I agree that the outer limits of the communities are probably the most underserved and the most areas needing service for people to get to the various jobs at times when public transportation is not running and when it's not feasible to run that. When we look at the ridership, the boardings per operational hour of 31, that's not impressive. And so I think that
Mr. Schaefer, you've got about 30 seconds remaining.
Okay, well, thank you. I will end now then.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions for the speaker? Seeing none, questions for our presenters? Alder Foster, go ahead.
Thank you, and thanks for the great presentations. It's really, really exciting. I guess, well, a broad question, just, I'm not sure how, like, are you looking for feedback, on those questions from this group tonight, or is this sort of informational and you'll be coming back with what you hear from the stakeholder and public and then asking for us to chime in on this sort of first batch of questions?
This is effectively your second warning that a big, hard decision is coming at you. Okay. We've done one presentation before warning about this. It never hurts to repeat. I don't want anyone to be surprised when I ask you a hard question in a couple of months. So that's really the point of this. Obviously we have more information now from the choices from the analysis we've done than before, and we're here to basically share that and highlight some of the key things that are coming out. But we don't need. I would never stop you from expressing opinions, but we don't need you to express opinions now.
Yeah, I want to add to that response. So yeah, we're certainly open to hearing any comments you may have at this time. Really, we're just showing you the types of information that are going out to the public in the next few weeks, and in particular this week. And the idea being that in a couple months from now, we'll come back and say, here are some things that we heard. What options should we be developing? So that will be the next step in this process in a couple months.
I mean, it sounds like we'll get there, but I guess could you just flesh out a little bit when you come back and say what options should we be developing? What I think what I'm trying to get a better understanding is to what degree is this an abstract question, i.e., give us a percent of ridership versus coverage, versus it seems like in practice there would be inflection points along the way, right? Like if we said, here's how much money, 100% to ridership, now start backing off of that, and there's going to be sort of logical steps. It's not going to be just picking a random percent out, right? Is that like, will that process occur, or how much do we need to give guidance with this in more of an abstract sense, X percent this way versus that way in order for you to come back with, to get that kind of feedback, I guess?
By the time we ask you for a percentage, the question will no longer be abstract because you will have bright contrasting pictures in front of you, and you will have people expressing very strong views about one or the other of them. And so those two pictures of different ways the network could look will be illustrations of what would happen if you went to a particular ridership coverage split one way or the other. We'll trust you to interpolate in between and say things like, well, I want to be about 2/3 of the way from this one to that one. That's a valid answer. Or I want to be all the way over on this one. Or I want to be further than this one, whatever. The point of those two pictures is to sort of clarify what it looks like at 2 points on the scale. We also have the existing system as a point of reference too, so that by then, you'll know much more concretely that if you choose a particular number, the network's going to look more like this. And everyone will know that about every part of the site. So by the time you're asked to give that answer, it will no longer be answered.
Sounds great, thank you. And then I'm assuming then we give that sort of first fork in the road direction, and then you will go and come back with perhaps some variants that are all in that general direction.
I think the answer to the other part of your question, you mentioned having different amounts of money. Right now, the mainframe of the work of this work is that we're working with a constant fixed budget. Frankly, even if you do imagine there being more money at some point, it's really helpful to have done this exercise with a fixed budget so people understand what it means to make trade-offs within a fixed budget. And then I think, so we'll go through that process. And when we get to draft plan, of course, the number may have changed. But for the purposes of this exercise, we're going to ask you to get to a ridership coverage split of how you would split the current resources. Then there's a separate question of if there were more resources, how would you spend those? Which you're also welcome to think about.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Foster. Margaret Bergamini, go ahead.
Thank you. A question about how you determined how many jobs were available within a certain travel distance. When you were looking at the outer boundaries, were you including, did you draw on jobs that were located within a certain distance of the current system? Did you, or were you at all looking outside of the boundaries of the current system? Say, for example, crossing a jurisdictional line where, a village or a city is not a member of the system currently, but has, 1,000 jobs in an office park that right now is 3/4 of a mile from the closest metro stop. And the other question with that is, was this at all future looking? As I don't know where we're at post-COVID, but prior to COVID, Dane County was the fastest growing county in the state and was adding a number of jobs. And unfortunately, a lot of those jobs were being located on the periphery. So will your plan tell us anything about that? Did your maps today tell us anything about that?
So first question, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong. Chris, did we study jobs wherever they were in any jurisdiction? Okay, so that's the answer to your first question.
Yeah, entire region.
Right. So any job that's conceivably reachable within any reasonable amount of time is in the database, right? It's not like we excluded Middleton or excluded certain jurisdictions. So we're counting a job that we're even counting jobs in places that the network doesn't go to if you could walk there from the end of a bus route, right? The other thing I want to emphasize is that what that blob is not where you could get to in a certain distance, but where you could get to in a certain time. So it's always looking at time, and it's always calculating walk plus wait plus ride. So the sum of all three of those is the total travel time. So for example, when you're thinking about frequency, we assume that you're waiting half, if the bus comes every 30 minutes, we assume you're waiting 15 minutes because we're calculating this based on the average time that somebody's trip might start or might end. Right. So it's very important to remember, too, we are properly counting the delay involved in frequency, the delay involved in the fact that you want to go now, but you can only go 20 minutes from now when the bus comes.
Not to get too technical about it, but in this particular case, we didn't even make that average assumption. That's what we often do. We actually calculated every 2 minutes in the middle of the day, how far you could get in 45 minutes. And what you see on those maps that show how far you can get in 45 minutes is the average condition.
Now, your second question, Alder, was about the how future-oriented this is. This particular calculation that we're doing is necessarily present-oriented. And so it's based on what we know about population and jobs, what we know about population and again, I believe we're basically relying on the most recent American Community Survey, which would be 2018. Is that right?
We're actually using TAZ data from 2016.
TAZ data from 2016. We are, of course, at the worst possible time in the cycle for this, just on the verge of having a new census. So, we don't know what we don't know, and we can only work on the data we have. There's another side to the whole future-oriented question, which is how this relates to things that haven't been built yet or being built now. And that's also something that I think will be brought to the table and discussed. It's an important thing to discuss as we go, but it's not in the data. What's in the data is, well, hopefully they're there now, jobs that were there in 2016.
To the extent also that your development is mostly in the peripheral areas, what that's telling us is that the challenges that you're experiencing now are, over time getting more severe and are trending in that direction.
Thank you, Margaret. Did that answer your question fully? Excellent. Chris McCahill, go ahead.
Thanks. Thanks for the presentation. I also had a question about the accessibility analysis, which I'm excited to see being used for this study. I guess I'm sort of previewing how that will be useful. And I'm wondering if as we get into the understanding the trade-offs of the different options that will be using those numbers to understand those trade-offs. So I'm sure under either case, there will be well-served areas with higher accessibility, but will this help us understand the magnitude of those differences? So for example, one option gives certain people 10 times the accessibility compared to other folks.
Right.
And so I guess kind of at what stage that will be useful.
Daniel, do you want that one or shall I?
Sure, I can take it. So the short answer is yes. The more detailed answer is, so we're going to have to start by figuring out what your network would look like if all that happened to it was BRT and we didn't make any fundamental major changes in what it does. And then we're going to look at what each alternative would look like, and we'll do the same access calculations on that baseline and on the alternatives, and we'll be able to tell you something like the average person can access X% more jobs, or 75% of people can access 10,000 more jobs. Statements like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You'll see.
I think that pretty much answers it. Yeah, thanks.
Go ahead, Alder Foster.
Yeah, I had a similar question to Margaret's, and I think I understand the answer related to thinking of future growth. I guess I would just make a suggestion that when you are coming back, it would be a really useful map to include. I know in our comp plan we have pretty clearly identified future growth areas. I think having at least one of those maps showing that and how the proposed networks would align or not with that, I think would be really useful during that conversation. And I'm thinking they might even, planning division may even be able to provide some estimates of what level of growth they think those areas could accommodate in terms of residences or other destinations.
And I would add, by the way, that when we draw these alternatives, it doesn't happen off in our ivory tower. We'll be around a table, hopefully physical, but probably virtual, with key staff, and we want to have City of Madison planning staff there so that we don't just have a map, but we actually have them telling us exactly what they have in mind in each place. So all that will be baked into the alternatives when you see them.
Yeah, that sounds great. I'm thinking it may particularly be useful when we're thinking about the trade-offs with coverage, that there may be some areas that could expand coverage and also pick up or add access to a future growth area that might, put another ball in that category, for example. So that sounds good. And I did also, I guess this is maybe for city staff, but I sent a quick note to the chair of the Plan Commission, Chair Zellers, and just, I think we should make sure that this presentation at a minimum gets to Plan Commissioners, if not having their own presentation, because this is, I think, really fundamental and important when we hear comments about let's not repeat these mistakes, and getting a better understanding of access and one of the legs of that stool being planning and what destinations are where. I think it's really critical that they have a full understanding of what we can and can't accomplish through the network design and the impacts of our land use decisions in access.
Yeah. Adding to that, I think Metro serves multiple jurisdictions. In fact, we have Randy Dahl here from Fitchburg, Middleton, and Sun Prairie, and all of those are, I'm just going to say, growing communities in Dane County. And so somehow we have to piece it all together.
Margaret, go ahead.
Yes, precisely to Tom's point, and to point that Mr. Walker made earlier about this being kind of, in terms of the data available to us from the census, maybe being the worst possible time to be doing this. And, consulting with city staff, consulting with our current partners, of course, I know you've been doing that. You've been consulting with the regional planning council and their staff, the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. It seems to us, and I've been saying this as much to the commissioners, to the consultants, that there is sort of, there's another decision tree here, potentially, which is where do we foresee, how much service and where do we foresee providing service that's perhaps outside of Madison or in an area of another city that is going to become Madison. It doesn't, if we're looking at building out, doing a once in a decade or 2 decade revamp of a transit system, it makes sense to be more forward looking than backwards. And given that transit and public budgets are both finite resources, there's potentially a chance here to make a conscious choice where we decide we are going to be expanding, and who gets to make that decision, how we make that decision is going to be very important, I think, in our relationships with our partners, both for the basic system and for BRT. So I would sort of add that into the flow chart, the decision chart.
Thank you, Margaret. Any additional questions or comments, feedback for either our presenters or city staff? Seeing none, thank you to all of our presenters. That was outstanding. I learned a lot and really encouraged to see what happens next. It sounds like there will be a report out very soon. If presenters and staff can make sure that that gets to the board members as soon as possible, I think that would be valuable. I think it's going to be really important for all of us on the board to have the time and take the time to really go through that in depth and make sure we understand it, so that we get this right. Mike, I see you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes. Thank you. I'd just like to thank Jared and his staff. They've been doing a great job. And just also mention that we have a website, mymetrobus.com/redesign. The executive summary of the report, which I believe has been posted to Legistar, is not on the website yet, but it will be soon. And there's a document section. And when the full report is available, it will be posted on that same site. Again, mymetrobus.com/redesign. And if you look at the sidebar on the right, there will be a link for project documents or something like that. And then I just also like to mention that we have a public information meeting on March 3rd, 6 p.m. And the details for that are also posted online. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. I'll also point out that the 3 of the board members will be participating in the stakeholder meeting earlier that day, or we'll at least have invites to that. All right. One last thing, I guess. So I want to follow up some on Alder Foster's comment about this presentation going to Plan Commission. I'm happy to forward or to write an email to Chair Zellers and point them to this this recording if that's adequate. Alder Foster, with a recommendation that they review this. Were you imagining something different, or?
I mean, I think that's a great place to start, and I mean, Chair Zeller certainly knows how to look for additional support if she thinks that would be warranted, and if there's an opportunity for staff to be able to, if she wants to add it to a future agenda and have a discussion, I think it might be worthwhile, but I would leave that up to her discretion.
Okay, I just want to make sure it doesn't fall through the cracks here. Tom, go ahead.
Yeah, there may be opportunity. I think there's a joint transportation land use workshop with the Planning Commission in the middle of May, where they're just, rather than approving all the things that they approved, it's focused on this. We are going to talk about transportation demand management and some parking, but there may be room in the evening to bring some of this, and then maybe there may be additional services that have been performed that would provide more detail.
All right, thank you, Tom. That may be something that it might be worthwhile to see if TPPB members can participate in that in some way. All right, again, thank you to everyone. Last call for questions or comments before we end the meeting for the evening. All right, seeing none, we do have one item of actually housekeeping, approving the minutes from our meeting last month. We seem to have skipped that in the beginning. Assuming all board members have had a chance to review those if they wished to, is there a motion to approve?
I'll move approval.
Thank you, Margaret. Is there a second?
Second.
Didn't catch, or is that Alder Furman? All right, thank you. Any discussion? Badri, go ahead. Badri, I see your hand up. Did you have any discussion?
I think you might be frozen.
All right.
No, I was seconding that one earlier.
Okay, thank you. All those in favor of approving our meeting minutes from our last meeting, please unmute yourselves and say aye.
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 Opposed, no. Chair believes it's unanimous. If you'd like to register a no vote, please raise your hand. Seeing no hands raised, that's unanimous. That's all I have for the evening. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move adjournment.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
I heard Alder Furman first. He gets it. All those in favor of adjourning the meeting for tonight, please unmute yourselves and say aye.
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 Opposed, no.
Aye.
We're adjourned. Thank you. Have a great evening, everyone.